Hey, it's Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and it's Tuesday. It's December 6th. This will be our chart lesson for the day. And as you can see, looking at the daily chart, we had some follow-through selling today, very similar to yesterday. We closed off the lows. We closed much lower than any of the previous closes, although it looks like we've tried to bounce back inside um, the trading range here. So we'll see if we continue lower here. We did push through the EMA. You would expect prices to pull back and retest that before going lower, even if we're going lower. Um, Again, this middle line, this purple middle line, is a 21 bar EMA. The others are based on um, some different criteria but the middle one is your 21 EMA, based on it's just a 21 bar exponential moving average there. So. Um, The others are based on some proprietary information, so I don't share that. But anyway, um, pretty strong follow through today. We closed higher here, making me think that we could bounce, at least come back to check the EMA. I mean, we could turn up from here. We'll just have to see. But as you notice, we did turn down right off that trend line of this larger blue channel, and so far that means this channel is still in play, and we could continue to sell off here. We'll just have to see. We need to get through here and continue lower, and this all turn these bands turn lower again before I'm going to be convinced that we're going to make another leg down, but we'll see. So anyway, let's flip over to the intraday chart where you can see it. Definitely a down day. There's actually there's a couple of ways to look at it. It looks like there's two separate trends after a small correction in there, but there's actually probably a larger channel that you wouldn't find till late in the day. So, but let's just look at it. I'll show it to you when we get over there to make more sense. And here we are. You can see the original trend that I had on my chart early this morning, and I had the lows coming right across here. But we ended up pushing lower, which could be an overshoot. It's hard to know at that point, or it could mean that the channel low is much lower. And really, what it is it's probably way down here, and that does seem to fit with the midline during the day. But it would be difficult to find this ahead of time. It really would. I mean, once we were making these, maybe you drag this down and you use this for the upper line. I probably would have drawn it more like that. Um, but there was another way to find it. We had this original move down, and then we had this correction here with a couple of legs in there. So I would find your measured leg on, on the first one. I don't know how I managed that, but uh, which was there to there, and then second leg, and you can see that gets you a nice target there, very close to the lows. And then I would just find me another channel here, and you can clearly see we were working off this trend line here, um, coming down, and then the low side of it was down here, and that you can see that midline fits well across there. So there's really, I mean, this is just a shorter term within the larger term if you and depending on how you drew it, but that's how I originally drew it. And so I traded this again. I was mostly trading the shorter term stuff in here anyway. Um, and then once we started lower here, you're looking for the measured move based off this first move. And there's also another measured move in here off these two legs. If you measure that first leg, then you get a measured move down here before that's where you got the correction at. So that became the middle of the entire pattern. So there's different ways to look at this, but I mean, that's basically how I saw it. So again, you want to narrow down into these tighter patterns. That's how you're really going to find your setups and so forth. So, but it gives you you always want to see the bigger picture pattern too, just to get an idea where prices are going and what prices are trying to accomplish. And somebody actually emailed me today about that, asking about going over more bar by bar stuff. And honestly, the patterns are not that hard. I mean, there's pretty simple to see a second entry here and a second entry here. The bar by bar and patterns are they're fairly simple to learn. And so the magic happens by learning to understand what prices are doing and where they're going and where they're headed and where their targets are and that kind of thing. And you're not going to learn that bar by bar. I mean, for the most part, once you learn to spot the patterns, the rest of it's fairly easy. Actually, let me rephrase that. The rest of it's not fairly easy. The rest of it is the most important part. Finding the patterns is the part that's fairly easy. So the bar by bar stuff, and that's really the difference between a skilled trader and an amateur. An amateur is looking at every swing and every swing high and every low and looking for a setup. Where a professional is going to find these trends, and I'm waiting for prices to come back to these trends and give me a setup. And I'm looking for them to reach these targets and either give me a reversal or a new trend. And so that's the difference. A skilled trader is not sitting here looking at closely at bar by bar trying to figure out what's going on because you can't really tell. I mean, it's easy to spot a second entry. It's easy to spot a lower high. It's easy to spot, that stuff is not that hard to learn. And that's really the only thing you need to know when it comes to bar by bar. The key is looking at this big picture and knowing where prices early on, I thought they were going to here. But they end up going all the way down, another measured move down to here. And so once you understand that, then you start to find these patterns and you trade these smaller patterns, and it's all about the key entry points, which is what I told this trader. It's the key entry points. That's what you got to learn to find. So if you're going to sit here and practice and learn on something, don't be trying to go bar by bar. Try to see the big picture. Try to find the trends, the patterns, and try to figure out where the key entry points are, because that's where if you go and study your chart, and you'll see where all the big moves come from, and it's generally the key entry points. Here it was a midline before we had that big move down. It was a triple test on a midline. Here we had a trend coming up. It comes back, and it's this key entry point. We had another move here. It didn't actually make a big move, but that's where your moves are all at the key entry points or the breaks of those key entry points before prices go to make another move. And 75% of the time, probably prices are somewhat range bound. And so you have to switch to the range rules, and then you're just looking for buys off the lows of the support and sales off the highs of the support. I mean, it's really that simple. But it takes a while to be skilled enough to be able to read this chart and find all this stuff and figure out where prices are going. So I hope that's helpful. But bar by bar is really not that important. If you're concentrating on that, you're concentrating on the wrong things, in my opinion. And I say this a lot, that you need to be working on the context. And when I say context of what the chart's telling you, that's what I mean. The big picture. Where are prices going? Are they just going to chop sideways up here all day? If they chop sideways in here, we're looking to buy down here, and we're looking to sell up here. Here it was obvious that it's a little bit of a downtrend because we're making lower highs every time, and we're pretty much making lower lows until right in here we find a little support before it gave way, and then you get two measured legs down in this larger blue channel, and you've got some smaller channels, micro channels within that. And so that's what you're learning to see. And then you just wait on the patterns, the setups, the second entries, the lower highs, the reversals, the traps, that kind of thing. So don't concentrate so much on bar by bar, because you'll be concentrating on the wrong things. But anyway, 7 o'clock came as we're trending down here this morning, and we're actually making lower highs and lower lows. And maybe you just had the channel early on, your channel just looked kind of like this. And then once we started going lower, you look for your next obvious point, and that gave us a midline in here, and it looked accurate at the time, so that's what I was going with. But you probably would have started with it up here. And this is a downtrend. Prices are swinging back and forth, so you could still trade this both ways. But we didn't have as much consistency down here until here, and that's a little bit congested right into the EMA, and you can see prices didn't go very far, and they turned down. It still would have worked, but there's not a lot of buys here. It's mostly early on sales, and then it was obvious we were in a downtrend. So anyway, we're making these lower highs and lower lows, and We got a channel coming up. We get a close outside, move to a new high, and there's a second entry short. I like that trade. Same thing here, a new trend up, first entry short, second entry short, so another second entry short with the trend, another easy move. And it's a little bit too congested here, and it drops down. There is a little breakout pullback here, but it's not anything I think it's worth risking there, because there's too big a chance this is going to be a range up here and it fails and comes back. So turns out we get a nice move down, and then we get a close outside here, and then we head for this next lower leg down. And nothing really in here that's worth attempting. And then you get a first entry, second entry, and if you hopefully you drew that trend channel down through there and it confirms the trend channel. It's a second entry short. It's a little bit sideways with the failed breakout, but it's right at the key entry point again, and I like going short there. You don't know if you'll just get a scalp or if you're headed much lower or what. At that point, if you just try to find a midpoint, it kind of looked like it was right in here, and so it looks like we're headed down here, and you can kind of see how that midpoint was working out in there. It looks valid, so that's what I went with. I also had a target down here by just measuring this last leg and looking for a move down, and you can see it's right across there. We went a little further, but notice how we went sideways there. And that trend line's holding. It looks like we might bounce out of there, but we finally get a break of this smaller two-tier darker blue, and you can see there's a little two-legged correction, and we turn down and we run to a new low. There's not a lot of setups in here. We did try to go higher once, twice, 3 times, and so that's a triple test. Plenty of room to the low here. I like going short right there. It's right off the EMA. Lots of reasons to like that short. You don't want to go short way down here that far away from the EMA, and then because we're going to correct shortly, and there it comes, boom. And no real chance to go long in here. Nothing in here, too congested. There's a drop here, but no setups, and then we're just kind of going sideways again. Again, I don't see a deep, there's no short setup here, there's no long setup here, so you're just kind of waiting. And then we bounce back up here, and we actually have this channel coming up. We get a close outside right here, move to a new high, then a lower high, and that kind of confirms that trend line right down through there on a lower high. It's not a perfect signal bar, but I think it's good enough. And that turns just enough room back to the EMA just in case it did bounce there. But we're all pointing down here, so I like that. When we actually come back here again, there's no setups in here. It's just a little bit, we're really just kind of working sideways here. It's tempting to go long here, and it would have worked, but again, we're in a downtrend. We've got a new down trend line that seems to be in play here. I would be very careful. And this just probably needs adjusting a little bit. I don't think we had a close outside. It's not convincing even if it is. But we're just continuing to work lower. Another little channel here, short-term break. You do get a close outside a new high here. Again, it closes above the EMA. It's not quite a perfect. It's a little congested. I'd wait for a lower high or something, and you just don't get one. It just kind of chops sideways. And then finally it drops on down. You get a first entry, second entry, right back at that key entry point. Big bearish bar. I marked this one green because you had this inside bar, and it's fairly bullish. So it really kind of negates you being able to take this trade. But this is a fairly strong trend. It is a second entry, and that is a very bearish bar right off a key entry point. You may still take that trade if it breaks lower. You may not get a runner out of this one, but you at least get an easy scalp. This one is tempting as well. It's right at the EMA. It's 2 legs back. It's a second entry short. It's just not a very good signal bar. And it breaks higher and then turns down, but they fight it back. So, I mean, it's another one you could argue to be green, but it's just not a perfect setup, so I'm not as crazy about it. Turns out to be a pretty good trade. Again, you probably don't get a runner on it or anything anyway. That's too congested. And you drop down. Again, you don't want to be looking for any longs in a downtrend like this. Just sit tight. And once again, you get a close outside here, move to a new high. I didn't mark this one. You could make that one green. We haven't quite you don't really know exactly where the lows are, although you've got enough midline here. You probably, if you're a decent chart reader, you probably could figure this out and know we probably got more room to go down to the downside. But it somewhat, if you bring it up to this point, it somewhat fits in there too. So you could have gotten fooled and you may think we're going higher. And so that kind of worries you right there when you're not back to the main trend line yet. If you obviously figured out that we're not through going to the downside, maybe you take that trade. There's a good bit of room back to the EMA either way. The thing is, you're probably better off to wait on a lower high just to be sure that you're going the other direction. And you just don't get it. It drops down, comes back. You get the next lower high is way down here and it's moved too far. And so you don't really get a chance. But if you're just patient, a few minutes later you get an easy second entry with a nice signal bar. I mean, that's a gimme right there. It's as easy as it gets. And then you get a lower high right a few minutes later with a big bearish bar, and off it goes. So sometimes you got to be patient, but if you're just patient, you'll get an easy setup. Then we bounce in here again. I don't see any reason to be trying to go long. There's not a great long setup here anyway. There is a second entry long right here off of the key entry point on this spiking channel, but we're right into the midline and it's holding so far. So we could turn back down there. So in a big downtrend day with a less than positive signal bar right there, you're probably better off to wait. And if I zoom in here, you can see that signal bar. The key though, one thing about it, it's only 4 ticks. So there's not a lot of risk in it. So maybe you take that trade. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I really went back and forth over that one. And you can see it definitely trapped some shorts, and they had some short cover in there when it rockets up. But it didn't go far, and then it's going much lower again. And that's the danger here, because we're in a downtrend. You can't, I guess what I'm trying to say, if you screw up counter trend trading against the trend, you got to be right. Now you can actually make a mistake entering with the trend on a big downtrend day or a big uptrend day and still survive and end up with a nice trade. It's more forgiving when you're with the trend than when you're against it. So when you're against the trend here, yeah, it's only 4 ticks, but there's a chance you're going to have a loser. So you lose 5 ticks, maybe 6 ticks. It's not a big hit, but maybe it's worth it if you're reading the chart right. You just need to make sure you know what you're doing. That's more advanced. It's for more advanced traders. For the most part, if you're trying to get profitable or just barely profitable, you want to stick with the trend. Don't counter trend trade in any way, because you'll just screw your trading up. But it runs up, finally gets a break here, still runs to a new high, but it's after 230. But I didn't see anything else I really liked here. This is too congested. It's just it ends up dropping and going lower, but I mean, there's only like 1 tick to make a new low on that close outside this brown channel, and you would expect prices to try to go back up to the highs here, which is exactly what happens after it makes a new low, but it could have only gone a few ticks and made a new low and then turned up and stopped you out. So you couldn't, this is what you were expecting. That's what I'm talking about understanding the context. If you're smart and you understand what the chart's doing, you know as soon as you get a break of this channel and a new low that there's a good chance we're going to try the retest of the high on this spiking channel here. And also we're probably headed to the upper side of the trend line because we just came off the low side. And that's exactly what happened here. So even though that trade would have worked, you were looking to get long here, not short. And so that's what I mean by understanding the chart, the context, and what prices are trying to do and where they should be trying to go, and staying with that trend or with that decision until the chart either proves you wrong or it follows through. And you're suspecting that we're probably going higher and you probably shouldn't go short here, even though it still worked. You're fighting the trend and you're bucking the trend, and sometimes it won't work and you won't get lucky, and you'll say, I knew I shouldn't have taken that trade. But what generally happens is people skip this trade and watch it work, and they'll tell themselves, I knew I should have taken that trade. And would you follow the rules? If you follow the rules and the trade still works, you still did the right thing. Because if you break the rules and try to counter trend trade here, the next 10 times it won't work and you'll get stopped out. So all you'll do is reinforce bad habits. And so that's why you should always study your trades too, because sometimes you'll get lucky and you won't notice it until after the end of the day when you go back and study your chart, and it's easier to look back and say, yeah, I should have known we were headed higher here because we came off the low of the trend and the higher trend line's up here, and we're looking for a retest of this high, and this one's already followed through, so we should have been looking for long all along. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's not too confusing. But yeah, don't worry so much about the bar to bar stuff. Look at the big picture. Figure out what prices are doing. Figure out where prices are going, and you do that by drawing these patterns on here. These all the way down to the micro ones, so you know when they've played out as well too. And stick to the rules. And one of the main rules is, especially if you're not profitable or barely profitable or break even, don't counter trend trade, because the market's unforgiving to you. You can make a little mistake or be a little bit early or a little bit late if you're entering with the trend, and you can still survive. But if you try to enter counter trend and you're a little bit early or a little bit late, or you're just flat wrong, the market's not going to be forgiving, and you're going to get stopped out most of the time. And you're going to wonder why you can't get a winning trade. And you'd be surprised how many people have instantly gone from losing traders to winning traders just by never counter trend trading again. It'll work just enough to keep you trying to do it, and most of the time you'll lose. What little money you do make, you'll give it back 10 times. Don't do it. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. Not a lot of trades today, but some pretty good basic second entries like we like. A lot of them off the key entry points. But there were some nice moves today. So very similar to yesterday, though. For as much down moving as we have, there's not a lot of entries here, and a few of them are green too. So, but anyway, I hope you had a good trading day. I hope you learned something in today's chart lesson. We'll be back again to do it tomorrow. I'm done for today. This is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and we'll see you next.